So what should we start with?
Existence.
Existence. Okay. That's a great place to start.
So existential and existential therapy and existential phenomenology. What I like about existential therapy, personally, is the fact that it's critical of a medical model that has tried creatively to construct an alternative to psychoanalytic, psychodynamic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And that, unlike sister approaches within the humanistic tradition, it didn't go all soppy. There is a sort of an edge. There is the tradition, particularly French existentialism,
mm-hmm.
but even in Husserl, it seems to be the place where it's okay to ask big questions.
Okay.
I like that.
When you say soppy, what do you mean? Sentimental?
Sentimental, the humanistic thing, we are all one, we're all together, why don't you send love to others? And I was recently in some event hosted by some humanistic practitioners, and we had to go through this grueling loving exercises where it was taken for granted that you do want to hug and you do want to love the other person. It's just that you are too conditioned to do so.
Right.
It's a militant, lovey-dovey thing, which, as far as I know, the existential approach is a little bit removed from. There is a certain austere sternness, uncompromising look at the human condition.
Of analysis.
Of
analysis.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
And
say a little bit. Is there other still signs of the same affection for love in existential phenomenology too?
Yeah, that would be the next thing to discuss. So for me, the premise is this: existential phenomenology is open enough to inquiry, to exploration, and unlike many other approaches, which tend to be more dogmatic, there is room, and it's critical of the medical model, the biological model. It's critical of psychoanalysis, and then within it, then there is it has fossilized into what is canonically orthodox existential therapy and what is not. And that's problematic. And one of the orthodoxy is this belief in the ground of universal relatedness, which seems to be now dogma within the main or the most prominent discourses in existential therapy.
So are you saying, Manu, that in a sense existentialism is against dogmas of all kinds, like the medical model, psychoanalytic, some of the previous traditions, but as in it defined itself, at least originally, let's not say of all kinds, but it defined itself originally as in counterpose to some of those things, but then has generated some dogmas of its own, which
Yes.
you would then question at the leading edge of existential thought.
Yes.
Right.
And of course, to state that it is against dogmas of all kinds, it's a little
It's
bit
dogma
too,
for a start.
yeah, it's kind of grand.
Yeah.
But at least there is enough room for trust in process, experience, exploration.
Mm-hmm.
And that's already a good antidote to create something before, existence before essence.
It's an openness before a fixedness.
Yeah. So existence before essence, openness before a fixedness, as you say. But the challenge we have now, for example, one challenge is this dogma of universal relatedness, which comes really from psychoanalytic, relational psychoanalysis and intersubjectivity. But the other dogma is that is creeping in, and it's out of a desire to oblige towards the institutions, towards the policymakers, is the obsession with quantitative and data. So we reach the point now where in some sectors of existential therapy is no longer existence before essence, but data before existence.
Okay.
If it makes sense. Numbers come before. And it's pathetic because numbers are only one of the many signifiers. They are handy. If you play music, and I do sometimes, all three of us play music. Numbers and mathematics and music go very well together. But number is not a privileged signifier. So,
do you want to say what you mean by a privileged signifier?
That if something can be expressed in numbers, or data, surveying, then it must be right. If the statistics, the research says so.
Just trusted more.
Yeah. And there's so many other signifiers, words, for instance, the ones we're using now, limited, for sure.
And other ways of knowing things, I want to say, there's words, there's numbers, there's quantitative, but there's poetry, there's music, there's metaphor, there's myths and mythology. There's lots of different ways to have to communicate understandings and to generate understandings and to know things, put really simply, to know things that aren't based on what's essentially a computer model of the universe, and even a model of the universe I take issue with as well. But that seems of interest, the different ways that you can have almost an understanding that you can't quite make explicit. Numbers are very explicit, aren't they? They're very black and white, and I find that generally reality is shades of grey.
And there are ways, he was saying, to know something. And what is the most intimate knowledge, you could say? The most intimate knowledge is to not know, but to go into the darkness. How to know darkness? Not bringing a light. Not bringing a light. That's how we know darkness. And so to go back to what Hugh was saying, what is the canonical? Okay, universal relatedness is one. We could look at any of this. But the other one is this desire for clarity, desire for making what is unknowable, unknown, conscious, like the purpose of therapy. I think that's a trap.
Making the implicit explicit.
Yeah, I think that's a trap.
Right.
Because then in that, if we do that with existential therapy, then we go along most orientations that try to explain, regulate, control something which can't be controlled, existence, human experience, the unruliness of human experience, the unruliness of our feelings and emotions, of having a body, being a body. So there would be a pity if the existential phenomenological exploration, also in therapy, moves away from this unknowing, if I'm making any sense, and buys into the obsession, which is a kind of a neurosis of making everything conscious, making everything explicit, quantify it, nail it down, and making it into a product. Which this reminds me of Husserl. I think it was in the Crisis of European Science. So of course, Husserl is very important in our approach. He would say the thing is, do we have a culture? I think he called it process of communalization. That we have communalization, making something communal.
Okay, communalization.
Communalization, yes. Okay. So, is existential phenomenological therapy part of a culture, of a living organism where there are hypotheses, like the one we are suggesting here also in this conversation, where these are discussed and modified and changed in interaction?
Okay.
Or is existential psychotherapy bending to the need of the world we're living in, a postmodern world where everything has to become a product? So is existential therapy another product, which particular features, being, relationality, being towards death, all those dogmas of the approach. intersubjectivity, authenticity, and so forth. Are we part of a product, or are we part of a living organism that changes? That's for me a big question.
It's a big question, and it's about the fact that a lot of the books and a lot of the websites treat the different kinds of psychotherapy like they're apples and apples.
Right.
And actually they can have very distinct ideas of what psychotherapy is. So they're often presented as, here are 6 different ways of doing psychotherapy. But actually, existentialism and some of the others, to be fair, fundamentally challenge some of the ideas of what psychotherapy is. They've got a very different idea of what it is because they've got a different idea of what existence is, or humans are, or what's important and what's not. They've got different values. And so that's often missed, that we're not trying to get to the same place as a psychoanalyst or a psychodynamic therapist or even a humanistic counsellor or a medical doctor or a psychiatrist. We've not got the same destination in mind. It's not just how we go about it. It's a fundamental difference of what's worthwhile as a project, I think.
What do you think the destination is?
I was going to say, what do you mean by destination?
Yeah,
it's words. What's words, anyways? You always get hung up on these things because, first of all, it's a constant striving. It's not as if you can ever arrive anywhere and be done.
Yeah.
Not until you're dead, at least, and even then, that's when the process stops. But there's definitely what Heidegger calls, being towards death. But there's a sort of striving there, and I feel it in myself. I can then identify this, that I have a project. I am looking forward to things. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I've got various different things that I have planned, and so they are part of my idea of what will be. It's not a destination, and as soon as I get there, I plot the next point. But there is a sense of movement in life, like from something to something, even if that's itself a metaphor of a journey that's worth questioning. But it is a common one and quite a worthwhile one sometimes.
Yeah. I guess what I meant, when I said destination, I meant more purpose. What is the purpose of therapy? And I was comparing and contrasting, and I'm oversimplifying this. Okay, let's say that some elements, some aspects of psychoanalysis, classical psychoanalysis, for the sake of the argument for a moment, let's say that there are deterministic elements. So one way to understand therapy would be to identify some basic fundamental trauma in childhood, and then through therapeutic work somehow untie the knot and resolve and move away from that compulsion to repeat that same pattern. So there will be one way, and I respect that. The other way, again simplifying, could be the hermeneutic, where maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of existential therapy is hooked on.
What is it you think it's hooked on? Just unpack hermeneutics. Yeah.
If only I can create, and again I'm simplifying, a different narrative, because I am my story, so to speak. If I can create, edit, reinterpret my story in an interesting, creative way, taking on board, the certainty of death, etc., then there will be change. Well, I'm thinking of a third option, and the inspiration there is a pre-existential thinker whom perhaps we haven't fully absorbed in the existential canon, Nietzsche. Nietzsche would say the purpose of an inquiry is to weigh up what particular forces, natural forces, are at play in the life of an individual. Am I motivated simply by adaptation? Am I motivated simply by wanting to conform to a given
that I'll become whatever shape I need to be to get
to adapt. So he would call that reactive. And you find the same in Deleuze, in all those post-structuralist thinkers. So how can is it even possible to imagine an individual who, maybe with the help of therapy, with the help of self-discovery, of art, other form, whatever, can tilt, so to speak, in favor of active forces? Then we will no longer be reactive, will no longer be adaptation, it would be to learn and go with the natural forces that animate me. Usually, these are affects. So in that sense,
emotions, feelings, when you say affects?
Affects is a very wide thing that includes emotion, feelings, and includes also desires.
I think as I kind of picture it from your book, but the organism as an interpreting faculty.
Yes.
So, and I love that description. So instead of the self, the kind of solid self, can we meet the other as an organism, as an organism that is an interpreting faculty from this, and these and the forces, as you say, and what forces are in play with this person sitting in front of me, suffering, not suffering, happy, sad, and so on.
Yeah.
This is about sort of agency, initiative, choice, rather than reactivity.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the question then, I think that's spot on. And the question is, does agency mean an agent, a self?
Well.
Or is it rather, and I remember people like...
This is, I think, therefore I am. You're getting to the, does the fact things are happening infer that there's somebody making them happen? So it's
this is, I think, what we
point.
do, isn't it? We sum up and essentialize a description, a narrative, into
and fix
it into a self. So,
that's right. And it's not so much I think, therefore I am, is it thinks, therefore I am.
When you say it, that's the subject, that's the self that you're...
No, it. Okay, the old formulation before Freud, Grodek, was the id.
Yeah. I see, id, right.
And you could say the organism, that suits me fine, the definition. Organism, provided we're not stuck with biology. Okay, the organism, of course, is this body. But this body is not just organs, it's also a body that is inhabited, traversed by memories, dreams, emotions, feelings. Antonin Artaud, who used to speak about the body without organs, which to me is still a puzzle. I think he meant to value in the organism also aspects that are not only bound by organs, that are also, you would say, body-mind. They said there is memory, there is dreams, and this body has
that don't seem to be anywhere as such.
Yes, they are parts of the world.
It's a system.
Yeah. So, is this organism ruled by reactive forces? Are we only driven by adapting to the environment? Of course, adapting is a good thing, it's the adaptation, passive or active. And is adaptation the only thing that there is in life? Or are we also here for a purpose, for meaning, you could say, or for doing what we're supposed to be doing and trusting? And importantly, do we know what the organism can do. This is the old, we're back to Spinoza, one of my favorite thinkers. He basically said, we don't know what the body can do. We assume the body is the body of biology, the body that can have a certain lifespan. But do we know, for example, what a particular emotion or feeling felt in the body can do? Do we know if we allow an experience and feel anger? Do we know what it can do, where it can go? Could anger turn into compassion or turn into a powerful force that could be a force for good?
There's a real sense of awe when you put it that way.
Yeah.
It's like, how awesome could the human be if allowed to, become itself?
Yeah. I think we have these notions within the canon of existential phenomenology, but they've been kind of pushed to the margins. I'm thinking of the daimonic, or Rollo May, and Spinelli has given some attention to this.
I remember Daimon as a sort of good demon. Is that a fair description?
Well, it's beyond good and evil.
Right.
Daimon is anything that can overwhelm us.
Right.
And so intense desire or rage can overwhelm us. And if we let it in, it could become psychotic. But if we suppress it, this is Rollo May, really, it becomes apathy, no pathos, no passion, all passion spent, normotic, neurotically normal. Yeah. I'm absolutely normal, I have a good job, I have a nice car, my relationship is going well, but I don't have really an inner life. There isn't any strife internally. Hence, there is no psychic life.
And that sounds a lot like depression, what a lot of clients call depression. And something that you've reminded me of is that a lot of the mainstream ideas about psychotherapy and psychology basically are within a deficit model. They're obsessed with what's wrong here, rather than when you say about how could anger be a productive force, how can our passions, how can we harness our passions to sail forth into life and discover new lands, whereas the vast 99% of when I look out there, it's all about fixing anxiety or removing depression or PTSD and all these conditions, most of which are what bring people into my consulting room. But they're all from a deficit, that all you can hope for is to get back to zero. And I'm always for but what about in Maslow's hierarchy, the top of it, the spiritual, embodying your full potential, whatever that means. And that half of the pyramid, to put it one way, doesn't seem to get any attention at all a lot of the time.
A deficit, you were saying. That's a good point.
What's missing here?
Yeah. How can we fix it?
What's gone wrong?
How can we fix it so we can go back to the traffic jam?
Yeah.
Happily.
Get things back to ordinary unhappiness.
Yes, ordinary unhappiness.
So that's the ambition of that's it. But it is a lot of the time to get people back into a capitalist, to be a good cog in a big machine rather than to bring them to themselves.
So are we frightened of all those passions and feelings in the consulting room, also in the way we organise and structure therapeutic services?
We are. I am.
Yeah.
And I also know that if I don't have any of those forces running through me, it's pretty boring. As you were saying, it's a kind of a depressive position. Depression in itself, I wouldn't knock it, because intense sadness is also an affect, is also one of those things.
Well, I like melancholy.
Yes.
But I'm not so sure about depression, if it's possible to distinguish those things.
Yeah.
Is it?
Probably not.
Okay.
I guess I'm trying to, I would say I love melancholy. I like being melancholic and listening to melancholy songs and playing melancholy songs and engaging with that sound. You can see things that you can't see from another mood.
Yeah.
But when people talk about depression, they're saying that they're overdoing it, that they can't do anything other than be in that mood, and that's the problem for them.
Johnny Mitchell, A Case of You. gets me all the time. Oh,
In what way?
Jeff Buckley,
Right.
Lilac Wine. I mean, yeah, there is, of course, there are degrees. But there was something earlier we touched on, I wanted to go back to. That if everything is back to normal, and if there isn't inner strife, there is no possibility of creativity, understood not so much as in necessarily as painting or writing, but fashioning, creating myself. And to put it very succinctly, and maybe perhaps simply, there is no self really in a substantive way, and that's why I have to create it. And how do I create it? How do I fashion it? By working with a strife within me, with those natural forces that are at play. And that would be the third thing that I was talking about earlier, not deterministic therapy, not within the hermeneutics, but the technical term would be axiological, valuing what forces are at play and favoring active forces, creative forces in the individual, in the person.
Yeah. The tough part of that being, when you say active forces, active painful forces. Active.
Yes, because often, as we know, as I know from my own experience, I think you probably, I don't know if you would agree with this, but sometimes transformation or the possibility of transformation looks like crisis. It looks like something I want to avoid. It hurts. It changes the existing worldview. It changes my existing props that constitute my life. So in a sense, transformation is difficult. But with hindsight, I recognize that if it wasn't for those particular moments of crisis, I wouldn't have been in that position that I found myself later. I wouldn't have discovered a new avenue or simply another perspective of things.
Can that itself become a temptation to sentimentalize crisis?
Of course. Yeah. And feeling a bit sort of
smug,
existentialist. Yeah. Smug existential. I have a sort of tendency for that. So there could be too much drama, because sometimes a crisis really sucks, to use a colloquialism. It's not. Yeah. It's not pleasant. But I guess I'm saying is, I was responding to what you were saying. It doesn't look necessarily easy. Change is never easy. Transformation. The caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly process is a process of death and rebirth.
Can I just relating this back to the work of a therapist and using some of these ideas to help people in practical ways? Do you think it's part of the role of the therapist to deepen the crisis?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking it is.
With kindness, and with compassion. And with compassion, and I think a lot of it has to do at what juncture we are talking. Where does the person find herself? So.
Yeah, because often it's what brings people to therapy is some kind of what they think is going to be some kind of annihilation, some kind of psychic annihilation, like a wife leaving them or discovering of an affair or something dramatic. It has this drama, this violence to the everyday.
Yeah.
And I'm always kind of, there's almost a tension between what they're paying me for, what they think they're paying me for, which is to sort of fish me out, and what I end up doing, which is saying, no, go in it, fully engage, dive in, because you'll find in there that as you're saying, it's light and shade, that the darkness is what it's the roots that allow you to grow up to the canopy, to put it one way.
That's a nice analogy, yes. But I wonder about I wonder about how that's offered, if you like, so how we offer someone the opportunity to face crisis.
I don't know if I, the therapist, can actively offer. I mean, already the process itself, already going to an existential, say, therapist or whatever, is already the beginning of you could say, crisis.
Yeah.
So I'm just there to assist it and be honoring it.
Be alongside.
I don't know if I can really claim to actively offer. In that sense, I think a position of neutrality, which I think is taboo in humanistic and existential therapy, a position of neutrality rather than mere relational empathy is more valuable, because I don't have to be a cold blank screen, but neutrality can also mean radical openness. I'm just present at this process, and
an even-handedness, balanced approach to what's there.
Yeah. So, because often, I think maybe you were saying, going to say something else. The word offering triggered in some approaches in the humanistic, the offering of certain conditions, the offering of empathy. There is too much emphasis on me as the therapist doing something, and being so empathic, being so loving.
Yeah.
And so, or being, in existential terms, such a shrewd editor of the client narrative. I think all of that is still too hierarchical. I think really I have to get out of the way, in a sense.
It's the client doing the work.
Yeah.
I always emphasize that. And I want to revise what I said about the therapist, therefore, in light of what you're saying, the therapist deepening the crisis, because actually that doesn't fit anymore. I want to revise it to say that they may help recognize how deep it really is by being even-handed, by looking for what's really happening. They're not trying to deepen it, they're not trying to make it worse. They're just trying to recognize what's actually happening and how bad it may be. I'm often saying to clients, you're telling me how well you're doing, but this, I think you're here to tell me how bad it is. That they want to tell me that they don't have any problems. This week's been better than last week. It's like, okay, but I think you're here because something is dramatically wrong, and you don't need to do anything, but you could tell me about it if you want to.
And it may be that that's the only place where they can do that. I mean, for all of my occasional criticism of therapy, I remember I used to play music, and my bandmate said, "So you're becoming a shrink." I remember the shock that I felt. Oh my God. So
you're becoming a shrink.
A shrink. Right. So all I'm saying is it's not a glamorous profession, and I have criticism, but about the profession. At the same time, maybe it's the only place where that kind of thing that you were saying just now can be voiced. And whether it's group, by the way, that's the other story, group therapy, facilitation, or one-to-one. Yeah.
But it's not the way we, as you say, there aren't spaces where that's possible. Maybe this is the only space where that's possible. So I suppose I'm thinking about the culture of our world as it's reflected in the therapeutic meeting. And I can't, I suppose I'd like to hear a bit more about neutrality in a way, in as how that might, I don't know what the word to say it is, but how to kind of invite that possibility, even to kind of offer a different kind of culture to the kind of culture I'm likely to meet out there in the world, where my instincts for survival have to kind of get me through. The reactive forces of my life have to get me through, and or get the client through. So how there's a culture within the therapy room, as you say, which is what might be one supported by a neutral attitude from the therapist.
Yeah, maybe neutral is not the right word. I understand it neutral as an attempt, an aspiration to be open, to be open and not to be invested, excessively invested. But I'm also understanding that this is a difficult, it's more like an aspiration, because I can't bracket myself, suspend myself out of the room.
No.
I meant it essentially in relation to a shrinking, a diminished importance given to the person of the therapist, and a greater space given to psyche, I guess, to the unfolding of what needs to unfold.
To those active forces.
Yes, and so neutrality is the best word that I can reach for at the moment, but maybe openness, an aspiration to openness would be another one. But that doesn't mean, though, that I am ignoring the fact that I'm in a room, that we are two people with different cultural background, different gender, different class, different ideas and opinions. In fact, this is maybe a good place to address one other thing, which I think has become canonical in existential therapy, and it's this belief in universal relatedness. So, I don't know, I'd like to hear what you say, what you think about this, but the way I understand this is to assume that there is a ground of relatedness, and to assume that destruction, negation, rupture, violence, interruption can be taken out of the room, of the therapy room, is naive. And somebody like Judith Butler, for example, would say, if we assume that the therapeutic, analytic hour is a place where all these negative forces can be kept at bay, then it wouldn't be useful for transformation. It wouldn't be useful to psyche. It would be a neutered, not only neutral, but neutered environment.
I understand that, but what's the connection between that and what you said about the ground of relatedness, the fundamental assumption of that?
Because there is, in relatedness, and particularly in intersubjectivity within psychoanalytic thinking, which I think is the matrix for this view of relatedness. I may be wrong. There seems to be a belief that we are interconnected. And it's a matter of shedding the conditioning and shedding the things that get in the way, the obstacles, to come to this ground, which is a fundamental ground of interconnectivity.
Right.
And I'm questioning that. I am questioning that because, and in fact, the inspiration for that comes from phenomenology, comes from Levinas, who would say the other, and also from Derrida, post-phenomenology, and from Hélène Cixous and many other writers. The other, okay, how can I put it? It's a tremendous stretch. It's a momentous realization to see and to know that you are another. You're not somebody that comes into my horizon of the self. You are completely other from me. And by assuming that we are interrelated and that there is intersubjectivity, I gloss over the fact that on one level, you are an alien to me. I mean, the very fact that I believe somewhere in me that I am the center, because this is where I perceive the world. That you coming into being, into my in view, so to speak, really upsets that.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing to work with before we go to interrelatedness. And the other thing is that even what I call me, it has an otherness, an alien inside, which I'm kidding myself when I say that I know it, because I don't really know.
You're other to yourself.
I am.
This is the dividum. Well, how did you put it? I think in your book.
Dividuum.
Dividuum.
Yeah. So a individual.
Yeah.
We are individuals, not individuals.
Yeah.
It's so I'm not sure if I'm answering you, but it's of course we are connected. There is a sameness. We are humans. We speak the same language. We belong to the same tribe, and so on and so forth. We belong to the same nation. We sing the same national anthem or whatever. But no, seriously,
I think I'm starting to get it. I mean, you still probably need. It's my first day with struggling with that idea, so I might need a while. But I think the way I want to put it is that if you look around this table, there are three worlds here, with a subjectivity, for want of a better word, at the centre, rather than one world with three things in it and three rather than 3 points of view that are within the same realm. There's actually three quite distinct things. Is that something like it?
Yeah.
And there's difference.
That's nicely put. Yeah.
There's the possibility of a real substantial difference between those worlds.
Yes.
In how we experience things.
Yeah. And so before interrelatedness, what needs to be there is hospitality. You are the guest. I don't know you, but I decide to interrupt myself. You could say bracket, but I never like the word. Interrupt myself, interrupt my project to pay attention to what you say.
Yeah.
And that's for me the starting point. And then there are other things. For example, I'm baffled as to why the first modern phenomenologist is not part of the syllabi of most existential phenomenological training.
I'm dying to find out who that is.
Hegel.
Right.
When I told a colleague who runs one of these courses, he laughed in my face, basically. Because it looks like a far-fetched idea, but the origin of relationality as we understand it now, intersubjectivity, is found in Hegel. I can't fully become a self unless there is a recognition, acknowledgement of another. That's it's basic in therapy, isn't it? But the recognition is not only love, kinship, philia, or common endeavor, and so forth. It can also be struggle, war, hatred, violence. That's class struggle comes from that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we managed to remove that. So of course, on one level, there is universal relatedness, but the spin, add Buber to the picture, the cherry on the cake, Buber, I-thou, and you have a recipe for sentimental therapy. And sentimentality doesn't help because it also betrays what I was saying in the beginning, this uncompromising, brave, courageous, adventurous spirit existential phenomenology has from the start. Particularly, I have to say, the French manifestation. And particularly with people who, within existential phenomenology, are not considered canonical. Benjamin Fontaine.
There's a sense of people that have been missed, thinkers that have been missed from the canon of existentialism.
Sometimes I supervise people who I'm involved in and out of existential training. So some supervisors say, I've been reading Benjamin Fontaine, he was part of existentialism. I wanted to write an essay, but I've been told that it's not part of our syllabus.
It's not legit.
Now that's dogmatic. Benjamin Fontaine is absolutely radical, incredible. I don't know if you come across him.
No.
No.
So what is canonical and what is not canonical and why such privilege or place given to Heidegger, for instance, who never saw himself in the first place as an existentialist.
No.
And whose phenomenology, we can go into this discussion, but just as an example, whose phenomenology is not true phenomenology. He is only interested in phenomenology as a way into this God in disguise called being.
Yeah.
There are many questions, but what I'm saying is that luckily existential phenomenology is vast. And within that vast canon, or I don't know what to call it, I am interested as to why we have fixated on a handful of authors and practitioners. Is that political? Is it expedient when we run courses? What is that? I'm baffled by that.
You don't have. What would be your own thoughts on why that has happened? What's the appeal of Heidegger, for example? Why does he still have such enormous appeal?
Immediate response is because we have ejected Freud without understanding him, the death instinct. And so the death has come back through the back door to haunt us through Heidegger. We haven't fully understood Freud, and we have dismissed him.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. The second is that there is a crypto-religiosity in Heidegger. And although avowedly secular, existential phenomenology through Heidegger can still appeal to a language that is quite priestly in Heidegger, the shepherd of being and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And
it has a big biblical feel to the text.
I think it's because we haven't walked through the challenge and the richness of religion, because we say, I am existentialist, I am secular. But to me, the problem is not being religious or non-religious. This belongs to another conversation, but to answer is because we haven't walked through the challenge of religion and spirituality, and Heidegger provides a language that is of that sort.
It's authoritative and attractive.
And it's closeted.
And coherent.
And closeted. I don't know about coherent, but closeted.
What I mean is it presents a sort of system, as in
I see what you mean.
That, but it's not just. I think Nietzsche, kind of was. Someone described Nietzsche recently as sort of against everything that went before, but that makes him a bit incoherent because he's against that and against that and against that, and kind of deconstructs a lot of things, but then doesn't, in a sense, provide a one thing to replace it with. In the way that Heidegger does. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I think he does provide something.
I also feel some other kind of telling observation, isn't it, really? Look, because I think it is misunderstanding Nietzsche. Obviously you know so much more about him, but no, I think that's a profound misunderstanding of Nietzsche. Right. That he's a kind of
well, for instance, when he says, and as I say, my understanding is even less than that, but when he says that, there is no God, or God is dead, then that's a critique. It's a right, and it's us that killed him. But then what? It's kind of what's the? Tell me what does Nietzsche put in that place?
There is no God now the horizon is open, the open sea. The sea is open for our exploration.
Mm.
The thing is, are we in this because we are explorer, because we are experimenter? Because Nietzsche would be the experimenter. Or are we in this because we need a system to feel, understandably, a little less anxious about the uncertainty of the world? I respect that we want a system. I respect it. Please give me something.
Yeah.
Give me a raft.
Someone to save us.
Give me a raft.
Some greater power.
But the purpose of the raft is you cross the water and then you leave it on the shore. You don't erect an altar to the raft and start running MSCs, PhDs on a raft.
What a great metaphor that is, I can imagine.
Well, it's stolen from the Buddha.
Okay, yes, I hear that.
But Nietzsche doesn't offer a system, but he opens the ground.
But that's what I'm saying. I think that's why Heidegger's more attractive. Not more attractive, but that's why I'm playing with it. That maybe that's part of why Heidegger is on the syllabus in a way that Nietzsche is more adjunct. Although even Nietzsche, you would say, is canon for existentialism. But it reminds me of one of my favourite sayings, which is, a ship is safest in harbour, but it's not what ships are for.
Yeah.
And I love that. I always want to say, it's not what ships are for,
Yeah.
And you could say the same about humans, that it's not like we could be safe, we could alleviate all our anxieties, it would get us back, it would pay off the deficit, you get to zero, maybe you'd survive, but you wouldn't thrive. And this is where I get back to the things like about the passions, about the affect and desire and all the stuff that the winds, if you like, that pushes about and it hurts, right? And I see that every day and I feel it for myself, but that's what it's for. That's what I think, that's what it's for. And sail, if you can.
And there is room, time for being in the harbour.
Yeah.
And
from time to time.
Because the sea is dizzy.
Yeah.
Staying by the sea.
Makes you sick.
Yeah. Lots of people drown.
Yeah.
Who else, Manu? Who else is on your list of missing from the canon?
When people ask me what's the best phenomenological text, I would say Virginia Woolf's The Waves. The Waves.
That is a rare answer. Mm.
It's a stunning book.
Imagining life without a subject.
Mm.
And the moment you say that, I think, it's just like a pea soup. But no, it's that is one of the things.
Right. Imagining life without a subject. Wow.
Yeah. And it's also in Levinas. Imagining life he talked about a counter-existential. Can we think of an existential approach that goes to the root? And what is the root? Life without a subject.
Right. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of a poem I saw in the Underground yesterday, which I tried to memorise, and I'll try and say it to you now because it alludes to some of this. It's called "I Am the Song." You heard of this?
No.
I am the song that sings the bird. I am the leaf that grows the land. I am the tide that moves the moon. I am the stream that halts the sand. I am the what's the next line? I am the earth that lights the sun. I am the clay that shapes the hand. I am the word that speaks the man. And it's just something real, particularly the clay that shapes the hand. It really gets me. Is that line?
And the word is I.
Well, that's also what I think the poem starts to play with, because I is a linguistic and structural grammatical construct. It's very difficult to speak without it. But that's what the poem sort of starts to say. Well, it uses the word, but in a kind of counterintuitive way. But you still have to use it somehow.
Of course, and Nietzsche famously said, "We will somehow always have God because we have grammar."
Right. And that reminds me of a response I had to your earlier point about, Gott ist tot, and Nietzsche's God is dead. And I like your answer about the horizon's open. The sea is open, right? Off we go. But I also think in there's a potential that we think we don't have gods. And I think that we, as in using that idea metaphorically, is in exactly what a lot of what you've said today, Manu, about unconsidered dogma. Dogma that's so unconsidered we don't even know it's there. It's so ground, it's so base in our idea about reality that we never even think to question it. We don't even think to name it. We don't think it doesn't even exist in a sense. And that's what I call the new gods. I think there are, it's a bit of poetic license, but there are basic like you might use the stars to navigate, that people use things like numbers, you've mentioned before, as a fundamental dogma that allows them to steer through life. And we go around with this idea that we killed God. Actually, we've just changed it for some other ones.
I think, that was said earlier. You're right, yes. Yeah, and we are.
But I think it's a good point, because in that case, God is dead is still valid, because what is your favorite prop? Okay, fine. Now can you remove it?
Yeah, that's right.
That's what God is dead means.
Yeah.
So if existential therapy becomes a prop, what would be like to experience without it?
I feel nervous just hearing you say that. Don't take alcohol. Don't take coffee.
It's easier to say. No, don't take coffee. Oh my God.
No.
My heart weeps. And what?
Number one, coping mechanisms for life.
Coffee.
Yeah.
You could take that one away. Starbucks coffee.
You can have some.
Mine withdrawal.
Yeah, and in terms of the canon, I mean, for one thing, I want
it's
to.
a good question.
Yeah, and I'm still open to any further answers you have, but I also want to say something about diversity, because I'm very aware that we're three white guys talking about philosophizing about and for me, when I was going through the training of existentialism, the female voice, I'm really pleased you chose Virginia Woolf, because Simone de Beauvoir and Hannah Arendt, and there's a range of other, I struggle to name them actually, because they're so absent from the discourse. And that's something that could do with a bit of positive discrimination, I want to say, within the programs as well. Never mind people of colour and of various disabilities and genders and sexualities and all the other diversities that there are.
And of course, when we talk about self and identity, the greatest challenge comes from queer theory. And
exactly Judith.
From Hélène Cixous to Judith Butler to so many other writers. I mean, there is a fantastic style. And I don't think I don't think I have still managed to respond appropriately to the challenge. It's a formidable challenge to the sense of identity, and what goes on in terms of gender at the moment and masculinity. I work with men's groups, so it's an ongoing issue. But there are other people in the canon, and usually there are people who have decided they belong to the edge. And I think it would be nice to reread those writers who have been at the margins of existential thinking. Georges Bataille is one example. I mentioned I-thou, and you mentioned those other people, de Beauvoir, but also a revisiting of people like de Beauvoir, Merleau-Ponty. Already Merleau-Ponty, you have that sense of fluidity where, for instance, it takes the self seriously. It doesn't do the bypassing that Heidegger did by moving on to design. He said the self, Merleau-Ponty said, we have inherited this solid from the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. We have to deal with it. We have to go through it. And he goes through it by speaking about the flesh. So the whole phenomenological embodied tradition, it's still marginal, I feel. is still marginal. So sometimes it's even people who are in the canon, but they're not properly read and properly studied. Even Merleau-Ponty, there is a lot in there.
Yeah.
And then the arts. I mean, go anywhere. I would say Tarkovsky, for example, or films or novels, or a broadening of the canon away from, strictly speaking, philosophy. Because the good thing of post-phenomenological philosophy was to say philosophy is not a privileged place of knowledge. It's another art form.
And an art rather than a science as well is an interesting juxtaposition,
Yes.
given what we've been saying about
Yes.
unconsidered assumptions and dogmas.
Yes.
And some people, existentialists, are quite tend to be quite creative. So Sartre wrote a play, No Exit, and Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus, and things, brilliant things. Even Yalom, recently, American existential thinker, has written When Nietzsche Wept, and there's sort of created some dramatic way of communicating these ideas. I mean, I love theatre. Theatre's in a sense a huge love of mine. Where you go and see myth and metaphor and music all played out in a very alive way, in a way that's I want to say therapeutic, often, but it is engaging with the human in all its light and shade.
And when theatre works for me, I rarely go, but when I go, it's a fantastic treat. It touches you viscerally on a level, okay, the dialogue, the story, the plot, the characters. Here is the person that is missing from the canon. Beckett. Samuel Beckett. Anything by Samuel Beckett, including his fantastic novels. I mean,
right.
You have, it doesn't get more existential than that. It doesn't get more tragic and more comical.
He was a friend of Harold Pinter, I think.
Yes.
And Pinter is I went to see something Pinter at Pinter recently.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind with how existential it was.
And it is visceral reading Beckett, for sure.
Yeah.
It is just even reading Beckett. Watching his plays on the drama. It's certainly a visceral experience, yes. And
this goes on. I mean, there is a writer I really like, and at some point I knew, Emma McBride. I don't know if you heard of her. A girl is a half-formed thing. I mean, that's speaking from a fragmented place of suffering and so forth. So I think it's also including things that are part of the culture, and they are not only within the clinic.
Can I say something about, I suppose, the symbolic in therapy, as in theatre? So a place where where, and I like this kind of in your book, where we can glimpse and viscerally experience the tragic.
Yes. The best way to illustrate that is through supervision, I think. For example, for a moment we use that example. So, and this connects also to that notion of openness or neutrality. Okay, for me, what matters in the therapy room is that I am receptive to the affect present in the room, and that I am on a skin level before the word, before my cognition. Because what's the value of affect is a deeper way than cognition. That's my assumption. I might be wrong, but so that I am, you could say, touched, affected by your joy, suffering.
Before cognition.
Before cognition.
Okay.
I mean, cognition is, of course, it's part of what goes on. It's part of our makeup. So that I am affected. And that already goes against a tradition, or within therapy, canonical tradition, of having to deal with what is known as vicarious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that then, if I am affected too much, I'll go to supervision to shed.
Shake it off.
I feel contaminated by all this. Traumatized. Yeah. So the idea is that to be affected and to make affect the center of the therapeutic endeavor, to be affected is crucial, is central.
From the body too. From the body.
Yes, I mean, it is the body. There's nothing else. It's the body mind. It's the body, whatever. And so, and in the theater, what happens? Tell me if I'm going too long on for too. In the theater, it's the same thing. You don't get it until you are affected at that level.
Yeah.
When you move this from therapy to supervision, when it really works is when the supervisor can be in turn affected by what has been transmitted. So it's less about the story. She is married and divorced, has 2 children, and now is a single mother, and this and that. That's also important. But what matters is, what is the main affect? I am hit, taken, affected by this particular thing. And that's the work. We used to be, the psychoanalyst worked with those dimensions through a particular method. There would be a free association, would be other ways. And now this has been almost forgotten.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to answer your question. So affect is the center. And the way we deal with it is through the symbolic. And symbolic here means as symbolic as the theater. So you have the story, you have the character, and you have the principal main affect, which is the heart of theater. If I'm making sense.
It reminds me.
This is work in progress for me.
Yeah,
so I'm just thinking aloud.
Absolutely, and I like that. But it reminds me. There's a saying, isn't there, that people won't remember what you've said, but they'll remember how you make them feel. And I think that's resonates with this in therapy and supervision.